Transparency International presents the Corruption Perceptions Index 2019. Using a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 is highly corrupt and 100 is very clean, the CPI analyzes public sector corruption in 180 countries and territories around the world. The top countries are New Zealand and Denmark, while the bottom countries are Somalia, South Sudan, and Syria. However, when it comes to improving on corruption, the majority of countries are stagnating. Our analysis shows how the stream of big money in politics is linked to higher rates of corruption. In fact, low CPI scores are also associated with higher concentrations of power among the rich, while poorer citizens have little to no political influence. But even countries with high CPI scores aren't free of corruption. Multiple scandals show that transnational corruption is often facilitated by countries at the top of the index, countries where the proceeds of corruption are stashed. To prevent corruption and ensure that politicians and institutions always act in the public interest, governments must meaningfully engage citizens in decision-making processes. Help us spread the word.
Good evening and welcome to Plain Talk. My name is Christopher Ram. Thank you for joining me this evening. You would have seen from the promo and the short video, audio and video there, we are talking about the Transparency International 2019 Corruption Perception Index. There's no better person to discuss the CPI with my friend and Dr. Troy Thomas, who has been president of the local body Transparency Institute Guyana, Inc. for a few years now, Troy.
Yes, yeah. Somewhere upwards of 4 years.
Wow.
Time for a new person.
I'm sure there are lots of youngsters in the wings.
And yeah, I'd hope that some people would step up now.
Now, this Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, it's an annual, it's really a survey, it's a summary of several surveys, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Let's talk first about what it has shown in terms of Guyana.
Yeah.
Guyana now ranks 85 out of 180 countries, starting from 1 being outstanding.
Yeah.
I think New Zealand and
some Scandinavian
countries. And then you've got things like Somalia at the other end. Guyana seems locked somewhere in the middle. The middle would have been 90. The other thing to note is that if you were to take the raw score, because that 85 out of 180 is ranking
Correct.
the countries one against the other,
Yes,
based on some raw scores.
correct.
The score for Guyana is 40 out of 100. 40 mean from 0 to, so we rated corrupt by more than half.
Correct.
Is that a correct summary?
Yes.
Yet it shows that some improvement on the part of Guyana.
Yeah.
Take it from there.
Well, the first thing is that the Corruption Perception Index, we have to always remember its perception.
Perception.
And
it's limited to the private sector perception of corruption in this.
It's
public sector.
largely private sector. Private sector, and then other exports, which could be academics or it could be members of civil society,
Yes.
that sort of thing. Yes, but it's a perception about corruption in the public,
Public
sector,
sector. That's
basically.
correct. Yes.
So that's one other qualification. It's not saying overall, because you have, if you want to say overall, you got to include the private sector as well.
That's right.
But it's usually asking about interfacing with with the public sector. You're right in pointing out the issue with the rank and the score. And I would, for the purpose of comparison, the score is what we really should focus on. The ranking can tell you on a yearly basis where you are in relation to other countries.
Yes.
But you could improve in rank because others perform poorly, not
That's right.
because you perform better.
Better, yes.
So you got to understand that. So there's a limitation in comparing the rank
That's
from
right.
one year to the other. But yeah, the 40 out of 100 means we're not the worst country in the world, but
Not by any means.
Not by any
I think
means.
Somalia was
Yeah,
9
yeah,
out
they're
of 100.
really down there. But there's still a long
You
way
wonder
to
what
go.
9 out of 100 really means.
That's,
It's everything is corruption,
Wow,
Brad.
that is
It's unthinkable. It's frightening.
yeah. Because if you think of our situation,
Yeah.
and we're at around 40 on average, think about what it needs for you to get to 9.
Yeah, yeah. It's frightening.
Yeah.
Again, on a positive note, Guyana has in fact been identified as one of the countries that is improving
Correct.
in terms of, and we're talking about raw scores here,
Correct. Yeah.
not the ranking.
Yeah.
That Guyana has in fact, it's listed with Greece and Estonia among the 22 countries that improved their CPI, but over 8 years. It's not like if it happened in one
Correct.
year or it happened in the years, as Moses Nagabutu, the Prime Minister, would like us to believe that this only happened because the APNUFC came into power.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, it is over the long run. There was a CPI started some time ago, but in 2012, there was a change in the method to address many of the shortcomings of the measure that existed, and so it was put on better footing from 2012, and that's why you'll find the report referring to 2012 as
Yes,
a baseline year. And since 2012, you can compare the scores from one year to the next, and between that time, we basically moved from 28 to 40.
Yes.
Which is a reason, somewhat a sizable increase if we can
Yes.
say it like that. But that's between 2012 and 2019. If we go from 2015, there has also been a sizable increase because it was 29 in 2015.
Right. Uh-huh.
And so, but the years 2016 and 2017, those are the years in which we made major jumps, basically.
Yes.
But 2018 there was a 1 point regression. We stepped back a little bit.
Yes.
But if you look at it
38 to
overall,
37, I think.
38 to 37, yes.
Yes.
But if you look at it overall, we've been kind of, with accounting for that little variation, we've been kind of steadily improving. I want to say that what you see reflected in the index for 2019 might not be entirely reflective of what happened in 2019. And that is because the data from the various sources were not necessarily collected on the 31st of December 2019.
Yes.
Some might have been early in the year, as early as March or January. Some
Yes.
would have been even in the previous year.
Yes.
Because these data are collected from other sources for other indices, and they might have a year lag or 2 years lag. It just means that this is the most recent data at the year 2019.
Mhm.
And so I always advise people to not look at the CPI from one year to the next, but look at it over time to see
Mhm.
where we're going generally. And so I would agree with the view that from between 2012 to now, we have been on an upward path. That trajectory seems to have made a change from 2015 to 2017, and then it's kind of leveling out again.
Mhm.
We did move 3 points up in 2019. So all of it did not happen last year.
Mhm.
And the entire move that TI would be talking about can't be attributed to the current government only, because it's referring to the baseline year
Yes.
2012. Though we can look in there and still see that there has been some movement from 2015.
I had a read of the report that came out, the entire survey, it has some language that makes one kind of uncomfortable. And you're associated with that language, I might tell you, in the end note.
All right.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yes. Yeah.
It says, while there is much work to do, the government is demonstrating political will to hold former politicians accountable for the misuse of state resources. That sounds almost like a political statement itself.
I can see,
and you are associated with that.
Yeah,
I
can see how it can be viewed as a political statement. But let's back up a little bit. If we think about addressing corruption, what would be one of the major ways of addressing it? In my view, that would be, if I have to pick out one, it would be ending impunity, taking action against people. There are many other things you can do. You can put systems in place and so forth that can improve perception or even address some forms of corruption.
Yes.
But if people know you do this and you get sanctioned, that's likely to be one of the major driving forces for stopping corruption and improving perception about it. What we have had in the last few years is some attempt at at holding people accountable. At least if you look at it on the surface, you've seen cases being called. Sometimes we're not entirely sure, and there have been criticisms of the attempts, whether they were genuine or was it for publicity, walking somebody off the step, putting somebody in handcuffs so that they can be on camera. So I wouldn't deny that there is potentially those kinds of maneuvering. But at the same time, we can't deny that there have been some attempts to bring cases against people, whether they were successful or not. Now, an organization like TI, looking at that and everything else, keeping in the back of our minds that holding people accountable will, whatever the situation is, be one of the major change factor in that regard, it would seem then that if you want to make one statement about what may have likely caused this result, I can understand pointing that out as attempting to hold people accountable, which is like taking them through the courts for it. It's not the full picture, but it's one of the things I think that is relevant.
Because there are several things that...
Correct.
Correct. I think one of the worst, well, I don't know what you can say the worst, but we have a situation where the politicians, politically exposed persons, are refusing to submit statements that the law requires them to do.
Correct.
That's a serious problem.
That is a serious problem.
We have now, and nobody seems to want to do anything about it. So to talk about demonstrating political will to hold former politicians when your current politicians are violating the law, doesn't seem to...
I understand.
Was this statement in a bit of a questionable
I understand where you're coming from, but if we go back to the index itself, it's not asserting that there is or there isn't corruption.
Yes.
It's saying we're moving in the right direction. So any statement that is made to explain this is not going to be trying to assert that hence there is no corruption. It would say that this is one of the contributing factors to it. On the issue of government ministers not
only ministers, or public officials
making their declaration, that's an excellent point. But in the context of improvement, if we go back from 2016 to about 2018, there wasn't even a mechanism in place for people to do that, which would be the Integrity Commission. So if you talk about...
Well, they weren't commissioners, but the Integrity Commission was there.
It wasn't really functional, that's what I mean.
No, the Secretariat was there.
Yeah, sorry. Yes,
and you did have an obligation still.
You had an obligation, but you didn't have that committee formed there that would have been spearheading it and so forth. And nobody was doing it, as far as I understand. So while right now it's not working perfectly, and even government ministers are not compliant. I heard, was it last year, that the president did not make his declaration, which I found to be, that was something else. That one nearly knocked me off my chair, because if you were one of the persons there administering the Integrity Act and you're not declaring, that's a real problem. And how can you influence others to do that? So not working perfectly, or some might say not even close to perfectly, but in the context of improving, one might still see that it's better than it was 2016, 2062. So the point I'm making, we're not there yet, but we're seeing improvement. We're still not happy, but it's not the same as 2006.
Well, take this issue at SOCO,
Yeah.
Serious Organized Crime Unit.
Yes.
Money that was taken,
Yeah,
so-called, allegedly, because of corruption, can't be found.
Yeah. That's a serious one, because they're the people who should investigate people involved in the same kind of things that they're involved in. This reminds me of an example from Norway, one of the least corrupt countries in the world. But one of the, I think it was a police chief in the organized crime unit, was found to be corrupt and colluding with.
Yes.
This is one of the least corrupt countries.
Yes.
You know what I find as a silver lining in that? They found him and he was sanctioned. And in the case of Soku, I know it's still ongoing, but some might look at the willingness to investigate the investigators as a silver lining. Look, this thing was happening, it's absolutely terrible, but we're doing something about it.
In this case, it hasn't happened, though.
Well, I'm hoping it gets to to that
Well,
stage.
we're talking several months ago.
Yes, yeah. On the other hand, it could have been something that there was no publicity about and nobody didn't know, and things continued.
Well, people do know, Troy,
Yeah.
because I have a client
Yeah.
who has money resting there and we can't get the money. So people do know.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that in this case, and we should we shouldn't have to agitate, the law should take control, especially people who have been given power to administer the law, to go after corruption and so forth. We should not take anything with them lightly. If they're in violation of the law, I find that to be orders of magnitude more damning than somebody who has no connection with the law and government engaging in something. Because, I mean, you corrupt the system and you're using it to your advantage.
Well, you raised that issue. We understand the head of the Integrity Commission, a former magistrate, he was making the point that they don't have money voted.
True.
Now, surely a minister of finance who is committed as a member of a government that appears to is demonstrating political will, don't starve your integrity body of funds.
You're absolutely right. Nothing that you said there is wrong. And the Integrity Commission should have the funds that it requires to do the job that it should do. Otherwise, you're setting it up and then you're undermining its ability to do the job that it needs to do.
Do you think that the methodology, let me go back there, and that's your forte.
Yeah.
That the methodology is transparent and clear enough? Let me give you a background to that question.
Sure.
For several years, I routinely got a questionnaire to answer.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, that has dried up. Can this index be manipulated in any way?
Anything that people create can be manipulated. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't deny the possibility. And I don't know which index you were contributing to, Well, what I mean is, the CPI is an index that pulls from
Several
several
indices.
indices,
Yeah, that's correct.
and you might have been contributing to one
One,
of
that's
those. I
correct.
don't know which one it is, and yeah, it could be, it could mean something, or it could mean that they do a sampling every year, and even in randomness, let's assume you can have a certain observation occurring, but at some point its number is up.
Yeah.
Because if it's random, it shouldn't continue to be like that.
Yeah.
So it could be a case like, I'm not saying it
No,
is,
that's a
but I'm
possibility.
just trying to
but,
think.
but let me tell you what I did today, because I found that a little bit
Yeah.
concerning. The index says it surveys private sector people.
Yeah.
I called 6 leading members of the private sector, and none of them
Yeah.
has had a questionnaire to which they responded.
Yeah, interesting.
The point I'm making is that it ought to be represented. We must have confidence.
Yeah. About 2 years ago, I had written an article about this, responding to a criticism like that, where members of the private sector were saying that they are not aware of
Yeah.
what it is. One of the potential issues I'm thinking is that people might not know when they have contributed to this, the CPI, because of the fact that it gets information indirectly. So when somebody comes to you to collect the information, they don't know yet that this is going to be used for the CPI. And so that might be a missing link for people.
Of course, CPI should be saying that
Well,
in the interest of transparency.
but that's because the TI itself does not go and collect the data
Yeah.
to use. These organizations, 13 different organizations, 5 of them in Guyana,
Yes.
collect their information for their purposes, and then TI, Transparency International, asks them, requests of them, send me this information that you've collected so we can put it together. So the interface with individuals is never something that is done by TI itself. So it could be that somebody contributed to the World Bank survey. Which one is the World Bank survey? The World Bank Country Policy Institutional Assessment Survey.
That was one of the surveys from which.
That contributed to Guyana.
Yeah.
So it could be somebody contributed to that in some way. I don't know what, I didn't check their methodology in particular, but Transparency International has certain standards that each one of these things have to meet before it qualifies.
And certainly ought to.
Yeah.
But and I said, which is why I thought that language that they use. Now I go back to that. That statement
Yeah.
carries a number for the end note, and it has Dr. Troy Thomas, your good
Correct.
self.
Yeah.
Was that statement attributable to you?
Well, it could be part of something that I had written, but that document I had written is more comprehensive than this. So I can write something in which, for example, I might say there's been attempts to put cases before the court which seem a willingness to go after people who are suspected of corruption.
Yes.
But it could be part of a larger document where other things were discussed. But if you cite this one line, that does not give the entire picture of what I would have discussed, but it might have been a concise way of summarizing several bits of nuances that I might have addressed. The document that they cited, the article that they cited, was something I wrote about the results of the Global Corruption Barometer, which was done in 2018 for the first time in Guyana. That is actually a survey that Transparency International does.
Yes.
And we requested it. They were about to do it in Jamaica and Trinidad as per normal, but we said, wait, Guyana is here. We have an official organization. Why can't we extend it? And they went and got the funding and did it for the first time.
Yes.
That survey, information from that survey is also what the IDB used in its report, where it found Guyana to be the highest rate of bribery, so forth. That came from TI.
Yes.
I saw somebody, a good friend of mine, cited that thing, the IDB report, in a letter to the press.
Yes.
But that was cherry picking.
Yes.
That Global Corruption Barometer report, which I wrote about, which cites the 27% bribery in the public service, also said that 40% of Guyanese think that corruption is decreasing.
Mhm.
This is so you can think of this as contemporaneous evidence. 67% of Guyanese think that government is doing well in the fight against corruption. This is a representative sample of Guyana. 82% think that ordinary people can make a difference in the fight against corruption. And 27%...
What study that was?
This is a global corruption barometer.
Mm-hmm.
And 27% of public service users paid a bribe for public services in the last 12 months. My good friend only used this last part here.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, corruption perception and corruption overall, when you want to have an overall picture, it's a package deal.
Yes.
You have the good, you have the bad, and you have the in between and everything. So let's assume bribery at that scale, when you're interfacing with public servants, continued unabated. That can happen, and you can still perform better overall if, for example, you reduce grand corruption, if, for example, you improve the structures, if, for example, the Integrity Commission is more active and more people are declaring. I'm just saying, giving some examples.
If that's what happens.
So it's possible for those things to happen at the same time. And I think if you want to be responsible as an academic interfacing with the public, you should try and give a more comprehensive picture. You can still make your conclusion, but don't give just part of the evidence.
The part of the perception with corruption is also shaped by the media.
Yes, true.
It's also shaped by the kind of work
Correct.
you people,
Yeah.
Transparency Institute Ghana. Now the media, I think in 13, 14, 15, the media was particularly taken up with Pradoville 2 and,
Okay,
and
yes.
the Amila Falls and the airport and the Marriott.
Yeah.
Now, not all of which have turned out to be as bad as they might have been feared.
Okay.
Has the media contributed by its almost either its unwillingness or its failure to address corruption as an issue? Maybe the failure of Transparency Institute to take on corruption.
Yeah. Possibly. What I'd say though is that if there were questions, the issues that you cited there, the examples, if there were questions that are unanswered, the media would be right to pursue them until they're answered.
But the media has done so.
So if it was taken up with Pradoville 2 and so forth, it would suggest that there were questions that were not answered.
Mm-hmm.
And as you were saying that it turned out to be not so bad. It could be that at the end of all of it, you realize maybe it's not as bad as I thought. And I'm not saying that is the situation.
Yeah, the Marriott and the airport, I think.
So, but as long as there were questions to be answered, the media was shedding light on it. And indeed, yes. So they were doing their job.
Yes.
And
the question is whether since then they have taken their feet off the accelerator.
Okay. That's a good question. I guess we got to look around and see. The thing about corruption is that it's meant to be hidden, and you need investigative journalists and so forth. You see, in 14, you said 14, 15?
16, yeah.
Especially post 2015, you had the results of the forensic audits coming out, which focus a lot of attention on what happened before.
Yes.
So one can also understand, because of the magnified focus on pre-2015, and people learned more about that period, it could give them an impression that things are better now because we're addressing the past.
Mm-hmm.
But the media also needs to be consistent if new things are happening. to continue to address them, as you're saying. You frame it as taking your foot off the accelerator. I know, you see, oil has distracted us from many
which
things.
probably has its own. I think Transparency Institute, you call it, it's either grand incompetence, was it grand, or grand corruption?
Yes, that's what we said.
Have you all formulated a response by now?
Well, you see, part of it is that we got to get some facts. So we analyze what is there.
Well, one of the facts, the signing bonus, the hiding of the
Yes.
signing bonus, that is almost criminality
That
at the
is-
highest level.
That is a very glaring issue, and you would recall we wrote about that
Yes, indeed.
as well, because it just set such a bad tone for the whole thing, and then it puts the whole deal into this this bad light that you now wonder what else might have happened, or you wonder why did we accept just 18.
Well, but I always say this. Raphael Trotman came here and lied. He said he didn't sign, there was no new agreement, they just tinkered. That's a massive lie.
Yeah, it was a new agreement, and our analysis concluded that it was.
It's a new agreement, and they had this figment called a bridging deed,
Yeah, we have.
and they
not
pay
seen
for that. They paid for that out of the signing bonus. So this whole grand corruption seems to be probably as at least as strong as grand incompetence.
Yes, and we put the two out, and the reason for putting the two possibilities out is that we need, and I think it will come out at some point. Somebody is going to, if there was grand corruption, somebody will find a document somewhere. Somebody will come out with a first-hand account somewhere that blows the whole thing out of the water. But until you have that type of evidence, you want to make sure that you don't unfairly say something.
But that $18 million was the evidence.
It's absolutely terrible.
It was stupidity as well.
Yeah.
You write 5 copies of a letter. You send a letter. You're hiding money, and you send that letter to 5 people.
Yeah.
So I think TG was absolutely. It's a combination of corruption and incompetence.
Yeah.
It's stupidity on a monumental scale.
I don't put corruption off the table at all, because when you look at the experience around the world regarding petroleum, there's just too much that would have happened for you to say, nah, this is not corruption. So we are keeping focus on both of them. There is incompetence, but it is also possible that there was corruption involved in the whole deal. I mean, not even discounting the violations of the law that we identified
Yes.
in the deal itself. What is it that allowed all of that to just go through as it did?
And I don't mean to put you on the spot,
That's
but
all right.
unfortunately,
Sorry.
you know there was supposed to be a second guest
Yeah.
who copped out on us at the last
But
last minute.
But I have a running joke with my colleagues is that every time I come on your program, you tell me we're going to discuss this topic, and you always throw me a curveball at some point on some topic that I wasn't thinking about when I decided to come on.
Do I need to apologize?
No, it's all right.
Because we're talking about index, and
Of
what
course,
I'm
yes.
trying to suggest.
It's relevant.
What I'm suggesting is that, look, this perception is shaped by the media,
Yeah.
is shaped by civil society, it's shaped by, which includes
Correct. Yeah.
Transparency Institute of Guyana.
Yes.
And, you know, we know that the PPP had the drug bond, that issue with Queen's Atlantic. That was a big issue.
Yeah.
It was plastered almost on a daily basis, as much as oil is
Yeah.
featuring. But we have had, under this administration, the renting of a building where for 1 year rent is more than the cost of the building.
Yeah, that you're talking about the storage bond.
Yes.
I think that was a rotten deal from the beginning.
And nobody pays no sanction.
Okay, I thought you said nobody pay attention, but there was attention. But yeah, indeed, there was no consequence for that type of thing, and that is an opportunity to address corruption frontally. And as I mentioned earlier, that is one I think will have the biggest impact. Is if people know you do this, you're likely to get sanctioned.
Yeah.
And we have to show a willingness to not only go after former officials, but current officials, if they engage in anything like that. So we're not only addressing it in the other people, we got to address it in ourselves.
And you remember a very senior man was, a picture was leaked of the senior man in China.
Yes, yeah, I remember.
I mean, those are grave things.
Yeah.
And for the, I found this statement in the CPI, and you know I'm a founder member, I'm a friend.
That's fine. Yeah.
Of TG. But I am disturbed by this because it seems to be almost a blurb for the government.
Okay.
When you have serious issues. We
Yeah.
have the issue, for example, home stretch project. Up
Yeah.
to now, hundreds of millions of dollars can be accounted for.
Yes, and people should be sanctioned for those things as well.
People are promoted for these things.
It should be the opposite. So you can't only show a willingness to go after former government officials. You got to be able to hold a standard and say, even when I'm in government, I go after wherever there is wrongdoing, wherever there is corruption. And so that is still a problem that we have. We kind of reserve it for the other people. It shouldn't be that way.
And, you know, and I apologize, but I'm concerned about the index. I would like to see an index because I can remember Gail Teixeira and I had a big argument at the Demerara Life place. Ashley Singh and I had big exchanges.
Yeah.
So I've stood firm on corruption and doing something about it. Now, the question of this administration taking money from the private sector, and Troy, we're seeing it demonstrated, not only the government this time, the opposition, taking money from the private sector for campaign financing. You can't remove corruption until you deal with campaign financing.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that issue is one. I have a few major disappointments with what would have happened in the last 5 years, and that is one of them. And part of the reason is that there was a clear promise to have campaign financing laws before elections, and after elections people should go and check the newspaper. The president recommitted to establishing campaign financing laws. We're entering another election cycle here now, and we don't have any.
And not only that, it's taking money left, right, and center.
And that's it. The thing is, citizens need to know. And campaign financing laws is not only about knowing who is contributing; it's part of it. But citizens need to know who are the contributors.
It's also a democracy issue.
Yes, to see
because you
who
can
is driving
yes.
agenda.
Yes.
And because if somebody's money is driving agenda, you can see what is happening.
Which contractors?
If somebody gives you money and then they get all the contracts, people can link those things. That's one of it. Another important element of democracy that it addresses, or it would address, is the viability of small parties, which might have a small number of people supporting them, but important nonetheless for political inclusion.
Yes.
Parties can't support themselves year-round within the 5-year cycle, and that's why right before elections
that's what makes it a democracy issue.
Yes, so we get a lot of parties
so corruption undermines and
yes,
and this
definitely.
breach of promise by the president
and
undermines democracy.
And this is the importance of the campaign financing law. That's why I'm so disappointed about it. it could change the political landscape for us by allowing small parties to continue to do their work even between elections, because at least the state is providing some minimum amount that they can have, even if it's a skeleton operation going. And that is improvement in democracy, democratic representation, people getting their views out there on a consistent basis. And I'm very disappointed that, having been given as a citizen a clear promise to get this done, we are here in another election cycle, nothing of the sort.
And with the same kind of, because linked to the campaign financing is misuse of state resources.
Correct.
Your Chronicle and your NCN and your public facilities.
And the AFC was very vocal about that. Sheila Holder was very vocal about that.
Yes.
And to see that, I thought that was one of the things that was going to happen, given the energy behind it and so forth. And I keep repeating, but I'm very disappointed that we don't have that.
We have almost a unique situation in 2019, and this CPI completely ignores it. You had a situation where you practically had no parliament,
Okay.
because a government refused to comply. That's a unique situation, and TI need to know that. A unique situation where a government says, we are not bound by no confidence. Now, what that has meant, forget the politics of it, what that has meant is that there will be no parliamentary oversight of public expenditure for 1 full year.
It's definitely not a situation we should be in. It's definitely not an ideal situation. In terms of the CPI, however, ignoring it, I just want to mention again that while it's the CPI for 2019, the data that went into it would have been collected at various points. And that's why I keep saying we should look at the CPI over a period rather than on a year-to-year basis. For example, you see the World Bank country policy, that data set, the last iteration was in 2017. That contributed to this index. So if something happened in 2019, that has not been picked up yet.
So that is almost irrelevant to 2019 CPI.
That's if you want to link it to events that happened in 2019.
Yes, but it does say that this is the 2019 CPI.
That's because of the year in which it's published. And a lot of the indices, you might have some of them have a 1 year or a 2 year lag. Because remember, you're collecting data around the world.
That's correct.
Right? And by the time you finish with all of that, it's probably time to start the next cycle. So so what is happening now, you might pick it up, and it would come definitely on the indices that address rule of law and so forth frontally. You can expect a bit of a lag in that. So the index for next year would likely pick up some of what we are talking about, some of the especially events that happen in the latter part of the year.
Yes. Well, the no confidence and the absence of parliament is practically the entire year.
Yes.
There's been an absence of the procurement commission. This is a government, but surely it ought to have done something about it. The government ought to have done something about that.
Well, we shouldn't have this situation occurring, but I think all of it would come back to the one you mentioned with the no confidence, the results of that, and the state that we're in now, where they don't have the power to establish that. Because if they do that, then they're likely going to have the power to do other things too in the period. But the important thing is that particular situation has had a ripple effect throughout administration in Guyana. And that's why this is not a situation we want to find ourselves in, and not a situation we should find ourselves in again. So it's something I think we got to look at, and we need to address issues in the Constitution that can, if they can lead to these sort of situations, we need to address it. So constitutional reform was something else that was not delivered.
Let me give another example. You would have seen over the past couple of days. The Court of Appeal. I don't know what it has been doing. Since 2016, Ian Chang, then Chief Justice Ian Chang, the late Ian Chang, ruled that Scott and Felix were unlawfully in the National Assembly. Unlawfully. That's a court's ruling.
All right.
The government, instead of accepting what was a clear case of an unlawful conduct, went to the court and appealed. The Court of Appeal sat down on this matter for well over 3 years. Now, the question is this. Felix and Scott sat in the National Assembly, sat as ministers,
Yeah.
received money unlawfully. What is Transparency Institute? I guess you haven't thought about it yet. But should that money be paid back? It's state funds that are illegally paid out.
That's a good one. And I don't know, I don't have the legal background.
No, but I'm raising the principle.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
It's
But
money illegally paid.
I was
Should
just
it be?
I was just wondering in general. Let's say you assume that you have an agreement and you're getting some benefits as a result of that agreement. Let's say you're getting some benefit as a result of an agreement, and time goes by, and then it's found that that agreement was not proper. What does the court usually? I don't know. I don't have the legal background to determine that.
But I'm taking it outside of law.
But I understand
money
the
improperly
But
paid.
I understand the principle. Yes.
Money improperly
Yes.
paid out.
So if they were not supposed to be there, then they shouldn't be benefiting in that way from the national treasury. It's for taxpayers' dollars. As to how you address that, I'm not sure. I would have to be advised on. But one thing I'd say.
But
though,
if you use a high standard,
one thing I would say though is that the court could have perhaps put something in place as an interim arrangement while that is going on, understanding that if this goes on for a long time and people continue to, or the court could have made this a priority case.
but it ought to have done so.
Yes, to just get it
You
out
see,
of the way.
Because rule of law, the operation of the courts,
Yeah.
is a question of rule of law.
Yeah.
Rule of law and respect for the Constitution, as we've seen the Constitution violated, are interwoven in the corruption landscape and fabric.
Yes, correct.
So if the court has failed to do its work, at least in that particular matter.
Yeah. And they have you're right. There, many of these indices ask about the judicial branch of government and so forth to try and pull things together. So there is a rule of law administering justice, and then on the other hand, whether people see it as corrupt. So let's say something like that has happened. Do people see it as that it happened that way as a result of corruption, or is it because of inefficiency, or so people might somewhat chalk it up to different things.
But it could hardly be attributed to inefficiency.
I'm just
well, let's switch. I know you said cornball. We just say googly, but
okay.
Now, what kind of support has TG got from the government since its formation? So I'm not talking about the AP and UFC. Shouldn't the government be supporting an organization like this?
I think the state should be supporting
yes.
an organization like ours and other civil society organizations. And I think it can do this through some act of parliament and some... The suggestion I have is that Parliament sets up some fund that civil society can tap into.
But Troy, if you look at the annual budget, you got subventions to all kinds of organizations.
I understand. You see the part.
But to me, that itself is, if you don't want to promote anti-corruption,
yeah, then it's not an important thing.
yeah.
The one bit of caution I would express about it is that if government is giving you financial support, people can start to see that as compromising you when it comes to issues with the government. That's why I want it to come from Parliament.
I agree with you. No, I agree. Therefore, we can have a piece of legislation
Correct.
that says, regardless of which government, will pay that money.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. First word, yes. And TIGI has written to the speaker on that same matter. We have not had a concrete response to it. I don't know whether the way we went about it is the correct way or what's not, but I'm hoping that this is something that is really taken up, because you have civil society organizations that struggle. I mean, you need finance to do anything. We're trying to get money from other organizations, but what about, I see civil society work as part of being responsible citizens.
Absolutely. It's part of the governance of a country.
Yes, and the state should support that.
Now, let me ask you, I know we're running out of time. How bothered is Transparency Institute about our administration and oversight and supervision of the petroleum sector?
We are very bothered about it. I mean, my colleagues have toiled over issues related to oil. I would admit that it requires a lot of expertise, and because we're also right at the beginning, we got to learn everything quite quickly, so we're not always able to keep up. But we are quite bothered by it. If you remember the clause in the contract that requires the minister to give notice to things like those. I mean, those a provision like that is not designed to facilitate oversight. It's designed to allow you to get your house in order before somebody comes to see what's happening. I understand that the EPA did some work on that, and I don't know if they were able to remove it. I saw a report.
Well, they haven't removed in terms of their work.
Okay, yes. So it
but this one is the audit.
Yes. So I think supervision monitoring of the oil sector needs to be strong. Oil, given the kind of revenue that it generates, it can impact on generations to come, and we got to look at it with that seriousness. We can't treat oil like a hustle. I think we're treating oil like a hustle. We're treating it like we're gonna make a quick dollar, do some things and so forth, and show we're rich now. But we got to think way beyond that and put systems in place to safeguard whatever revenue we gain. And we know we don't have a great deal, and I think that needs to be addressed. But we need systems in place to make sure that we don't have people squandering oil revenues.
How equipped is TG to provide the kind of oversight and the bulwark against corruption that can potentially happen with the weak framework we have?
I would say right now not very equipped, but we're very interested in improving our capacity and getting involved. And one of the things we had planned this year is through an OSF grant. It hasn't been
OSF meaning
Open Society Foundation.
Yes.
It hasn't been approved as yet. In there, we have a lot of capacity development elements to do various things in the oil sector.
Yes.
Which would allow us to contribute more meaningfully to oversight but we need an ongoing. We need to have ongoing efforts and branching out into different areas. So I'd say we're willing. We understand the need for it. We recognize that we have to improve our own capacity to do it, and we're trying to make some steps in that direction.
Sure, you have been the longest serving president
I
of
think so.
Transparency Institute.
I
Yes,
think
since
so.
its formation,
Yeah.
yes. People keep a watch on Transparency Institute too.
Yeah.
Now, what's your future in transparency?
I plan to step back from leadership after this year, which is completing now. We have our elections around March each year. So I told the organization since last year at our annual dinner, which is usually at the Pegasus Hotel, that this is likely to be my final year at the helm of the
You're
organization.
leaving a little space for you to continue.
Well, at the point, I hadn't decided formally, but things were pointing in that direction, so I was alerting them.
Yeah.
But I've decided that now, yes, it's time for me to step back. I will remain active in the organization. I want to work on certain projects that we started, like this one. If we do get the funding, I want to be there because I was involved in framing it and so forth, and I'll be a resource for the organization. But as it relates to being at the helm and being responsible overall for the organization, I'd like somebody to take that up and run with it for a bit now. And it's healthy too for us to have this kind of change. You get too comfortable in a position that's not the best scenario.
And you think you've got the kind of second tier, or you've nurtured the
Yeah.
quality of the leadership.
I like how you were asking it the first time. The second time you put a responsibility on me. I'm not entirely happy with the extent to which I've been able to do that. In part, it has to do with people being available
Yes.
and so forth. But I think we have good people around still who can take up the leadership of the organization.
Well, sorry, let me thank you very much. I know you had a little problem with your car on your way here, but thank you very much for getting here.
All right.
Operators and viewers, thank you. Good night. I'll see you next week.